If you don't recall the story, 2 Chinese nationals, we never really figured out their status in Canada. Were they just here working? Were they permanent residents? Did they get citizenship? I don't think we've ever figured that out. But they were originally from China, and they had ties to the People's Liberation Army, and they're doing work with them, and they're also accredited scientists at our biolab in Winnipeg. And because the 2021 election happened and the way our system works, Parliament was dissolved, so they just had to let the case fall apart. But eventually the documents came out, and these 2 scientists were up to all kinds of things that they shouldn't have been, sharing information. I believe they were sending samples of viruses over to China, and so it was really embarrassing for the government, but they didn't want that out there.
Hello everyone, welcome to a day that I have definitely been much awaited. We are with Lilley. Brian, thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
And taking some time out. So I'd like to read out a quick introduction.
Sure.
I'd love to be nonchalant and speak about you directly, but definitely there is a lot that you've done, so I don't want to miss any of those. So today, I'm honored to welcome a distinguished figure in Canadian journalism. Brian Lilley is a seasoned columnist and author with extensive experience across radio, television, and print media. He has been a prominent voice in Canadian political commentary, known for his incisive analysis and unwavering commitment to journalistic integrity. Brian's career includes serving as a senior correspondent for Sun News Network in Ottawa, where he covered Parliament Hill, and hosting the television program Byline with Brian Lilley. He co-founded Rebel Media and later hosted Beyond the News on Newstalk 580 CFRA in Ottawa. Currently, he is political columnist with Toronto Sun, which is very popular. Some of you may be reading it as well, focusing on federal and Ontario politics. In 2012, Brian authored CBC Exposed, a critical examination of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, showcasing his dedication to transparency and accountability in media, which is going away right now. And there are a few heroes like him trying to save it. Beyond his professional achievements, Brian is known for his engaging presence on social media, where he shares insights on politics, sports, and culture. So please join me in welcoming Brian Lilley.
And sometimes I share photos of my dog on social media. I think some of my colleagues who aren't fans of mine would disagree with a lot of what you said, but thank you very much. That's a thorough bio.
Oh, no, thank you. You know, it's very insightful to know, Brian, that you put together CBC Exposed back in 2012?
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's about after 2021, 2022, post-COVID is when people started seeing the hypocrisy of media and how they're all brought out. You saw it in 2012.
I've been a critic of CBC for a long time, and it started with just realizing that they were bloated and overfunded. It's not as bad as it was years ago, but used to go to news conferences, and half the people in the room would be from CBC. So there would be the CBC camera tech from CBC French National, and then there'd be the CBC camera tech from CBC French Local, and then there'd be CBC National English, and then so you'd have 4 camera guys from CBC, and then they'd all have a sound guy for each of the cameras, and then they'd all have their own reporters, and then the radio people would show up. You guys are all working out of the same building, and you can't coordinate. Now they do a bit more, but it's still a giant bloated organization that takes $1.5 billion, and there's some good people at CBC, there's some good journalists, and they produce some good stories, but they constantly ask for more money, and so the money has been going up, despite what their supporters will say. And when you look at where they're putting their resources, it's not into English television or radio. They started basically, they have become one of the biggest news websites, and they're putting money into the web, and they're competing with the private sector. And so people will say, well, why doesn't the Toronto Sun or Post Media or, insert company here, why don't you just put up a paywall? Well, then we can be competing against CBC, which gives everything away for free because we've already paid for it. In Britain, years ago, the government there said, online, if you are within Britain and you are on a BBC website, you will not see an ad on the BBC website. We should be doing things like that. We should have been changing the mandate. They refuse to change or alter, and now Pierre Poilievre has taken up something I've long advocated: defund them, not sell them, not shut them down, just no more funding and you're on your own. And it has become one of the most popular announcements he makes at his rallies, and people cheer.
Do you think that's going to happen? I personally feel it's not right for, government to fund a network that is highly biased. It just doesn't make sense.
And that's part of the problem with CBC is they are highly biased, highly liberal in their bias. They don't admit it. And so,
of course, yeah.
as you mentioned, I was one of the founding people at Sun News Network, and we were open with our bias. It's like talk radio. You go on 1010, and that station isn't necessarily conservative, but everyone tells you where they're coming from. And CBC goes out there and they pretend that they are the unbiased arbiters of truth. And yet they're spinning you with liberal talking points constantly. And their story selection is for a downtown, urban, left-wing, elitist audience. That's who they're pitching to. And they do a good job of serving those people. Well, there's a lot of wealthy people in that group. They can pay for the station themselves.
So right now, Sun Toronto is very heavy on social media. You guys have got, I guess, over 220,000 subscribers or something.
On our YouTube channel,
just on YouTube. I may be wrong. So how do you see the transition? We were talking about this earlier. If you go to the US, a great growth in terms of the number of conservative voices that's been able to come up, because earlier, if you would start speaking something, you're named a sexist, racist, misogynist, transphobic. I can list like 10 or 20 of them, right? But a few people came out and they put something together of their own. You see Daily Wire, right? Ben Shapiro. You see Turning Point USA by Charlie Kirk, right? You see Candace Owens. In Canada, we do not have a lot of prominent figures other than Jordan Peterson, who also had a lot of unfortunate incidents in Canada. And I believe he spends most of his time in the US as well.
He's back and forth, is my understanding, and still lives in Toronto, but goes back and forth to the United States. He's just got his new book out, We Who Struggle with God. So I'm looking forward to reading that on a vacation I'm about to take. But, you name all these people. They weren't all there a bunch of years ago. Ben Shapiro was one of the regulars on my show, Byline. He was a paid weekly guest. There was appointment viewing to tune in and see Ben. Benny Johnson, another one who's very active.
Yeah, very popular.
Benny started out doing TV hits with me when he worked for Glenn Beck's The Blaze. Glenn Beck is an incredible pioneer in American conservative media. 2011 is when he left Fox to go launch his own program. And he decided that it's going to be all online. So he still has his regular radio show, and that's on, I forget how many stations across the United States, but he has built up a network. And then since then, Ben Shapiro and Daily Wire, and Jeremy, who's his partner in starting that, they've all built up a network. If we're going to build, it will be online. The Toronto Sun's YouTube page has grown by almost doubled in less than 18 months. We started putting in a concerted effort on videos, on shorts, on ensuring that we had a good steady stream of solid content there. It's not quite a replacement for a TV network, but traditional TV networks are going away, and people get their news from podcasts like yours or podcasts like mine or videos that people post. And I was talking to a woman in my building the other day, and she said, I don't like watching. She said, I want to get the news online, but I want short bits. So she goes on 1 minute to 3 minutes. That's all she wants. Learn about something, move on to something else. I'm worried that we'll get to the point where it becomes 6-second bites. Does it get too short at a certain point? But if you're putting out good quality short content, people will gravitate to it. And so, I always get asked, should there be another Sun News network? And my answer would be no. Not in the traditional TV sense.
And why do you say that?
Because it's all moving online. And in Canada, we've got this blasted regulator, the CRTC. The reason that Sun News Network went under, they required 100 hours of original Canadian content every week. That's a lot. And while the other TV networks that are all news, CBC, I'm going by memory, but I think for every cable and satellite subscriber in Canada, they got 57 cents. And every service was required to carry them. 57 cents a subscriber. CTV News Channel back at the time, I don't imagine it's changed. They got 17 cents. So CTV is only getting a third of what CBC is getting. We asked for 9, but mandatory carriage. And they said no. They said, you've got to produce it, but we're not giving you the means to make the money to produce it. And that's primarily how cable channels in this country and the United States make their money. Now everyone's cutting the cord. Do you have cable at home?
No, I don't use cable.
Yeah, I only have cable because it comes as a feature with my building. It's part of the condo fees. Otherwise, I would be a cord cutter.
Even if I follow any news, it would be probably their YouTube channels.
Yeah, so this is why maybe we can find other creators that can build up an online presence with good commentary in Canada that isn't leaning all the way over to the left. But it's going to be online. It's going to be on social. I can, from my phone now, do a broadcast over Rumble Studio that will go to my Rumble channel, my X feed, my Facebook feed, and my YouTube channel. Simultaneous live transmission to all of them.
Yeah. What challenges did you see, of course, because I'm sure you had to face quite a bit of backlash because you're conservative leaning, you ask tough questions. I've seen a couple of your interviews. What are some of the challenges that you had to go through in founding these companies or being part of the founding team as a conservative media, from either regulation or government, silencing sources?
So I've built up a reputation that most of the people that I want to talk to are going to keep talking to me. I still talk to plenty of people in the Liberal Party because I'm not on Parliament Hill on a regular basis anymore. My NDP contacts are not as good as they used to be, but I used to talk to Jack Layton and Olivia Chow when they were both up on the Hill. And people say, well, you're talking to him. Well, because you build a reputation, you build sources, you build trust, and people want to get their message out. So I never had trouble with that. Other journalists being angry that we existed, that was a real thing. And I remember one prominent journalist, after we announced Sun News Network, I was leaving News Talk 1010. I'd been their parliamentary bureau chief for 5 years, covered elections, interviewed Stephen Harper, I think 5 or 6 times just on radio, and then later on more times on TV. But I was seen as a reliable source, and then they announced Sun News Network and that I would be going there. There was a lot of backlash from my colleagues. And one prominent journalist took me aside and he said, screw all them. You don't work for them. You work for your audience. Worry about them. So that's what I try and do, know who my audience is and, deliver the stories that they want to hear. That doesn't mean pandering. It's just like, is a story important to the audience? Then you tell it. Sometimes as journalists, we forget that and we say, oh, this is an important story. And I've done that. And the good thing about the online world is you can see how many people read, watch, view, listen. And sometimes the story that you thought was really, really important, no one cares.
Yeah.
They just don't. And it's like, okay, well, good, I told the story, but clearly no one cares.
Yeah. I mean, for example, like saving $250 this Christmas, right? $250 Christmas.
You'll get that in March. You'll get that. You get the GST off for Christmas. You get $250 in March. So maybe there'll be a spring election.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think Canadians care about it. Like maybe what Trudeau is doing is he had left immigration wide open for a long time, right? But less than 18 months to the election, now he's trying to tighten things up. He's facing a lot of criticism about inflation. So he's like, okay, take this $250 and shut up. It's not going to work that way. So I don't think people are focused on certain stories where it's almost like you're throwing biscuits, right, at the citizens.
So I love that. He's copying Doug Ford exactly. So Doug Ford announced at the end of October in the fall economic statement that the government of Ontario would send $200 checks. And they're going to be checks. It's not going to be an automatic deposit into your bank. Why? Because you're going to get a check that says from the government of Ontario. So you know who gave you the money. As opposed to, I don't know about your bank, but if I check on my mobile app, sometimes I'm like, who sent that? Or who took that? What did I pay? Because the description isn't very good. And the Trudeau guys with the carbon rebate, first off, banks were all labeling it differently. And the real name didn't lend itself to good politics. So they asked the banks to change because it was just going into people's bank accounts. And they're like, oh, okay, move on. So now Trudeau is going to send that $250 in a paper check format so that you see that it came from him. And it's good politics to a degree. I said the same thing about Trudeau's checks as I said about Dougie dollars, which is what I called Ford's check. I don't have a good name for Trudeau's toonies or whatever. But I said the same thing about both of them. People are never offended at getting their own money back. Now, some will complain and say you're trying to buy us with their own money, but they're going to take the money.
Yeah.
Does it give Trudeau a boost in the polls? We had the big grocery rebate payments a little while ago when inflation was super high.
Yeah.
And well, my view was, okay, if the government has to buy my groceries, maybe there's a problem here and you should address that. They got no bounce from that. I think Canadians are increasingly at the point that I am where I'm just done with them. It's time to move on. Let's have the election now or perhaps in the spring. We don't need to wait till October.
So now I'm going to speak in the context of someone like me. Okay. I was not politically involved, right? If not now, I did not understand how the parliament works and how decisions are made in parliament. But after Pierre came along, what individuals like myself who's just focused on our work or our business, right, started seeing is these viral clips, right, of him roasting Trudeau in Parliament. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? But I never got to see any constructive output out of those debates, right? Because let's say Pierre would ask him, why did you not, speak about CERB scam, right? GC Strategies was given so much money, like $19-20 million, and no investigation happened. Why did you give money to them? And Trudeau goes and responds, oh, you don't care about the environment. So, and he does that all the time. And this is the conversation that happens. And normal people like me look at it and like, what's going on? Is any constructive output coming out of Parliament? So what are your thoughts on that?
Not out of question period. Question period is theatrics. Question period is just there for each side to try and get their clips. And it's been that way for a long time since the advent of TV in the House of Commons, which is before my time, but I believe it was the 1970s. It was Pierre Trudeau brought it in. And so the only difference between, the last 40 plus years that we've had TV in there and now is that now the clips get uploaded faster to social media and they're on Instagram, they're on X, they're on TikTok, and people see them a lot more. So is there anything constructive out of that? No. Is there constructive work done at the committees? Yeah. That's why we know so much about the Arrive scandal.
Yeah.
People like Michael Barrett, the Conservative MP from Eastern Ontario, just hammering them day after day. Michael Cooper, another Conservative MP from Alberta, hammering them in committee, trying to get answers, exposing what they've done wrong. And, since November 2nd, until they agreed to deal with this GST thing, the GST holiday, all they've been talking about since October 2nd is the Green Slush Fund, because the government refuses to hand over documents. They're trying to force them to. That may seem frivolous, and the government tries to play it as, well, you're just obstructing. One of the ancient rights of Parliament is to be able to say to the government, hand over what you have.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Because we have questions.
Yeah.
And they've done that. This is not a point of debate of whether the Parliament is able to or not. If a majority of MPs sitting in the House of Commons saying, show us the documents. They are legally bound to do so. And they have fought it, just like they fought it in the Winnipeg Lab Scandal. And in that one, if you don't recall the story, 2 Chinese nationals, we never really figured out their status in Canada. Were they just here working? Were they permanent residents? Did they get citizenship? I don't think we've ever figured that out. But they were originally from China, and they had ties to the People's Liberation Army, and they're doing work with them, and they're also accredited scientists at our biolab in Winnipeg.
That's a government institution.
Yes, and then just suddenly one day, the RCMP march in and escort them out, and they're fired. And
That's it.
okay,
Nobody
well,
knows.
what happened here? What was going on? We should know about that. Years of fighting, they refused to say, because at this point, Trudeau was in a minority. MPs voted to demand production of papers. They wanted the documents. And the government fought them. And they called the clerk of the Privy Council, the top civil servant. They called him to the bar and admonished him and said, you've got to hand over the documents. He still refused. They took the speaker to court, the government did, to try and keep that stuff secret. And because the 2021 election happened and the way our system works, Parliament was dissolved. So they just had to let the case fall apart. But eventually the documents came out. And these 2 scientists were up to all kinds of things that they shouldn't have been, sharing information. I believe they were sending samples of viruses over to China. And so it was really embarrassing for the government. But they didn't want that out there. So the committee work and things like I just described, it can seem boring or complex. That stuff's important. Question period is theatrics. It's about clips.
Yeah. So what does it take for election to happen early? Like for the parliament to decide, let's have an early election. Is it just the vote in the parliament?
So let's say on this GST change, let's say the government didn't count correctly. They're in a minority. So any money bill, anything that involves the government spending money is automatically a vote of confidence. If you lose that, you're done. Parliament's dissolved and we're off to an election. Or somebody else has to try and form a coalition. But the NDP is backing the GST thing, so that's going to go ahead. In the spring, we're going to have a budget. They could fall on that. The Conservatives have brought forward several non-confidence motions saying we have lost confidence in the government. And despite Jagmeet Singh saying, I've ripped up my agreement. And I was there. I was at the event. It was on Bloor Street West here in Toronto. And myself and about 6 other journalists tried to get him to say, does this mean you've lost confidence in the government? He wouldn't say. He would just say, I've ripped up the agreement. And he's turned around and voted with them every time since. So you need all 3 opposition parties to vote against the government, either on a money bill or on a direct motion of non-confidence. And, Jagmeet Singh wants his pension.
Yeah. So he's going to wait for another
I used to think that wasn't true, and then I did the math, and then I looked at his behavior, and he keeps doing it. He gets his pension vested in February. It's the rest of his MPs that don't. So in his riding, it was safe for a while, but Canadians aren't happy with Singh either. And so his riding could be up for grabs.
He is focused more on unwanted foreign policy issues. I don't see him focus on the economy. I don't see him focus on what is necessary.
Well, his views on the economy are groceries are expensive because of Galen Weston. Simply not true. Yeah. It's you can verify all this, but he points to Loblaws' profit. Their profit is made off of selling makeup at Shoppers Drug Mart. That's their profit center. Yeah. In groceries, you make about 1.5% to 3% margin on food. 1.5% to 3%. That's not a lot. He's doing quite well on food. They sell a lot of it, but that's not why excess profit is not what is driving up the cost of food. Carbon tax, which he supports, that's helping drive up the cost of food.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. But anyway, I have a few things that I wanted to talk about, so we can probably get into it. So the latest trade war that Trudeau is not trying to prevent with US. First of all, I am not one of those upset ones because Trump is the president. He's going to do what is right for his country, right? He ran on America first, and that's what we need in Canada. But Trump says that there are a lot of illegal immigrants also coming in from Canada. And until and unless you're going to secure your border, the latest story I read, the prime minister and federal government is not doing much, but provinces are trying to do their best. Quebec is trying to do something to, secure their border. Alberta is trying to do something. Ontario is trying to do something. So 25% tariff, what is it going to do to, people in Canada if that happens?
Oh, if it happens, we're going into a depression, never mind a recession. It would be devastating.
Close to $990 billion is what we trade with US.
Yeah, a few $1 billion a day. So, look, the goal should be to avoid tariffs. If the tariffs actually come through, it's a failure of leadership on the part of the Trudeau government. I was surprised that Trudeau threatened this. He had talked about 10 to 20% tariffs during his campaign, but mainly that was around trying to get countries to move in the right direction around China and things like
You mean Trump's campaign? Right?
Yeah, Trump's campaign,
Yeah.
sorry. He talked about 10 to 20%, but it was based around China stuff. I did not see him coming up with a 25% tariff on the border. Now, Pierre Poilievre is right. It's unjustified to do that to our economy. Do the Americans have legitimate concerns about our border? If you look at the numbers, the answer is yes. Most of my colleagues, they're not going to bother looking at the numbers. They're like, let's retaliate. Let's give them, put their tariffs on them. Let's fight fire with fire. Okay, a simpler thing would be to say, are their concerns legitimate? Well, we'll take the illegal immigration. It's gone up 82% since 2022.
Wow.
So
From Canada to US?
yes. And if you go back even further years, it's gone up dramatically. So 198,000 people were handled with what's called either Title 42 or Title 8, most of them Title 8. They're going down and trying to claim asylum in the United States. They want to be refugees in the States. And what's the biggest group? Indian nationals who have come here on some type of visa. They come on a visitor's visa, student visa, temporary foreign workers permit, and then they go down to the States. So 198,000 total, 43,000 of them are Indian nationals. 36,000 of those are single, unattached adults, mostly men. So you've got 36,000 men streaming into your country, walking through woods, doing all kinds of stuff. Yeah, you've got a legitimate beef to say, you should stop this. Now, I've had some Canadians say, well, it's their border. They can determine who gets in. They can fix that. No, because the problem is that we opened up our visa system far too wide. Mexico for a while, and the Americans complained about this under the Biden administration. So Trump's threatening tariffs, but by the way, Biden's been complaining about this too.
Yeah.
He just hasn't come in with the hammer.
Yeah, because he can't hold the hammer.
So Mexico was a big problem. They tightened the visa rules for Mexico, and it shrunk. It's not gone away completely, but it shrunk. So it goes right now, India's 43,000, China's about 12,000, and again, about 9,000 of those are single, unaccompanied men. And then Mexico's at about 10,000. So yeah, you've got a real problem there. And then on the issue of terrorism, Canadians are always very sensitive about terrorists don't come across from Canada into the U.S., especially around 9/11. That was a claim that a bunch of the terrorists for 9/11 had come from Canada. It turns out not to be true. But over the last 3 years, there have been 1,155 people intercepted at the Canada-U.S. border who are on some kind of terror watch list.
Wow.
And you'd say, well, it's going to be bigger in Mexico, right?
Yeah.
And it's 199 in Mexico. Wow. So on the immigration, we're about 9% of the problem. And so Mexico's bigger, but if you're 9% of a big problem, you're still a problem. On the terrorism, we are way above them. We're 87% of the people. Last year, we were 87% of the people stopped trying to enter who are on a terror watch list.
Yeah.
That's a big problem. Drugs, we can show them that we already work together. I think that's the way you do it. You show people might remember there was a big drug bust in October that made news because there was a former Olympian snowboarder on the part of the bust, a Canadian snowboarder. But this was a drug outfit that went from Mexico into California, into the U.S. Midwest, into Alberta, into Ontario. And police from all three countries worked to take it down. So we need to show them that. Say, look,
show the efforts, right?
This is what we're already doing, and we'll do more on drugs because you're worried about drugs. But then on immigration and the number of people being caught on the terror watch list, you go back a decade, and it maybe be 50 to 75 on the terror watch list in the total year, on the total Canadian border, now it's 458, 383. Okay, why is that happening? We need to focus on that, and we need to do something to drastically reduce the number of people going across to declare asylum in the States.
Yeah. So I'm an immigrant. I moved here as an international student and I worked hard and I was given a permanent residency based on, what I brought into the table. There was a point system. I followed the rules and I got it. However, because I have a little bit of a closer view of how the immigration system is, back in 2021, right, I was almost ready to go back to India because my points were not good enough to qualify as a permanent resident, so I was living in fear. By then I had moved to BC. I had worked very hard and I learned some skills that was required in tech for the government of BC, etc. But around the same time, something called as TR to PR came up. That is, temporary residents would directly be converted into being a permanent resident, a very impulsive decision. And I saw anyone and everyone who would apply would just get their permanent residency. And I was sitting there in my condo that night and I was feeling bad. I worked so hard.
Yeah.
I had to learn so many skills. In BC, I had to work towards getting an extremely high paying job that was beyond my ability just so that I can get those extra points. Had to do a bunch of certifications, but there were like hundreds of thousands of people who got it easy. So Canada has always been open to immigration, but when did this start going wrong, Brian, in your opinion? Because you've seen Canada for a long time. Immigration has been helping Canada from the beginning, but it went wrong at some point of time.
My parents came here a few years before I was born. They came in 1968. I'm not sure we had the point system then, but you had to have certain qualifications to get in. I remember my uncle trying to come on the point system. My mother's brother tried to move here with his family. He got rejected. He was a certified, qualified electrician from Britain with 3 or 4 young kids at the time, could have gotten a job very easily, supported himself. He was rejected. Don't know why. They never really tell you. So there have been controls around it and still high numbers. The last time that we actually were reducing immigration in any significant measure was Pierre Trudeau, because he would raise it and lower it based on the unemployment rate. He would say, okay, well, unemployment's really high. We can't be bringing in a ton of people. Lower the rate. That makes sense. But since then, we've had very high under Mulroney, under Chrétien, under Harper, under Trudeau, and people accepted it because it was orderly. It worked. Under Trudeau, we went from about 285,000 to 300,000 permanent residents a year to we're supposed to hit 500,000
And
this
this is
year.
post 2015, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we decided to almost double permanent residents. And then in 2022, the temporary foreign workers, they blew that wide open. And they said, well, the business community wanted it because of the pandemic. And you could have just said, no, unemployment's still high, pay more. You could have done all kinds of things. They didn't. And they didn't just increase it. They took off all the guardrails. So there used to be a thing, you couldn't have more than 10% in some industries or 20% in other be temporary foreign workers. You were not supposed to use this to fill a ton of jobs. They boosted it to 30%. And then once unemployment got above a certain level, you were supposed to not be able to use the program anymore because you're supposed to turn around, look around, hire Canadians, hire people that are here already. They got rid of that. They got rid of that guardrail. They put it up to 30% on the other things. And they're surprised that people took advantage of it. There's a Liberal MP from British Columbia, Vancouver area, Sukh Dhaliwal. He hired a temporary foreign worker to be a legal assistant in his land surveying company.
Wow.
Say, are you telling me there's no legal assistance in the Surrey area? Like, it's part of the Vancouver Metroplex. It's a pretty big area.
Yeah. And, I'm not here sitting supporting all of those who take advantage of the system, Brian. Definitely it's not right. However, I'd like to kind of point out at what leads to them getting here, right? So they started allowing a lot of public colleges to open up new branches. And what happened is, okay, they go to these countries, like let's say India. Moving to Canada is sold as a package deal, right? Certain things that we hear in those consultancies there is, hey, you move to Canada, your life is going to change, right? It's going to be
I feel horrible for these kids. They've been sold a bill of goods.
They sell their lands. They sell pretty much everything they have. They tell, okay, your healthcare is going to be free. Your kids will not have to pay for tuition or school. Your life is going to be amazing. You will be able to just come in, study, and you'll get a great job. And then when they come in, it's going to be hard for them. But now, if you look at it as a business, of course, businesses will try to increase their client base in one way or the other. If you open up the regulation, if you do not plan that, of course, businesses are going to try and use it.
Yep.
I mean, of course.
I look at the guys riding the electric bikes around my building. I live just off Yonge Street, and there's one area where there'll always be about 8 of them outside the Tim Hortons. They're all waiting for the next Uber Eats or DoorDash order. And then across the street, there's Taiwanese place, and there's always a group of about 6 to 8 of them. Most of them young Indian men, and I think, is this what you were told you were coming to Canada for?
And is this
to
what you
ride up
wanted
and
to
down
do?
the street in the cold?
Exactly. Yeah.
No, they got sold a bill of goods. Feel horrible for them, but so it's not on them. It's on the government who allowed it. Trudeau's tried to say, oh, it's the provinces, or it's the fault of the schools, or
So now
it's the fault of big
throwing
companies.
schools under the buses.
But you approved the permit.
Yeah.
Like Conestoga College, forget the private fly-by-night ones. Conestoga College in Cambridge is over 70% international students. They've got millions and millions of dollars in the bank now. They've got a huge surplus because they are taking advantage of the system. They're taking advantage of the students. You could say, absolutely, there's some responsibility on the Ford government for allowing that to get out of control. Most universities stayed at about the 20 to 25% that they'd been at for years, and a few colleges went crazy. But it was the federal government that approved the application, $77 an hour at the height for temporary foreign workers and students.
And do you think also that major immigration played a role in the crisis we are having right now, Brian? Because, I don't think people would have moved to Canada if they would know that average income is about $60,000, $70,000. You take home $3,600, $3,700 after taxes, and you'll have to pay $2,000 rent for a tiny apartment in Toronto. And if you would want to buy a house, it's going to take forever.
Yeah.
If it's more than $1 million, I'm not talking Toronto, I'm talking outside of Toronto.
It's almost $1 million in Hamilton, where I grew up. And that's mind-boggling to me.
So how did that happen? Canada is a big country, huge country, vast country. Why can't we afford houses here anymore?
Because we have developed a system where it's hard to get permits, where 25 to 30% of the cost is government fees and taxes before you've even started building.
Okay.
So, kudos to Stephen Del Duca, the mayor of Vaughan, Ontario. For people that don't know it, it's just north of Toronto. They just rolled back their development charges. They were at almost $190,000 to start.
Just to start putting together a property.
Yep.
$190,000.
Yeah, per unit. So
Wow.
You're getting home, and before they've bought a piece of lumber or a doorknob or a window or a door, $193,000. So he's rolled it back significantly, took it back to 2018 levels. So we weren't allowing permits. It takes forever to get approved.
Why is that though? I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you, but
Because we've allowed the bureaucracy to grow to the point where they're just constantly stopping things. And so you talk to developers and they will have, an environmental assessment study. Okay, well, that's fine. But now we've done one. Oh, no. Now we have to do another form of study. Now we have to do a study about sound impact in the area. Now we have to check out, there's this beetle. Someone spotted a single beetle of this type in the area. So now we've got to pause everything and go at it again. The amount of reports that have to be submitted from design, from the legal aspect, over and over again. It is like they're trying to make sure that you don't build. It is out of control bureaucracy that we need to do something about. So you add all that together, how long it takes, how much government charges, it's taking developers a very long time to be able to build it. I'm not saying that they're crying poor. They're doing very well, but we're not making it easy for them to build. And those are the people that build homes, right? Do you want to live in government housing? I can show you what government housing looks like. And it's not very nice.
Yeah.
And we used to do it, and we did it badly. In Toronto, community housing is some of the worst housing in this city.
Yeah. And sometimes you're distributed drugs.
Yeah. I just got an email about that in one community the other day, that the drug gangs are essentially running this one compound. So add all that together, and then we start bringing in 1.2 million people a year, and there's more demand.
And you're not planning.
Yeah, we did not increase housing. We did not increase healthcare. We did not increase the education system commensurate with the number of people we're bringing in. And then you get people like Doug Ford trying to build a highway and trying to allow construction of housing, and he's being attacked constantly. And I keep saying to people, if you don't want any immigration, and I'll admit we got it out of control, but if you don't want any, just say that. Quit saying, oh, but I'm an environmentalist, so I just want, we don't need any more highways. You can't add 1 million to people a year and then say, but we don't need any more highways, we don't need any more hospitals. That's insanity. And I live in a box in the sky right now. I'm sure you do. But is that where everyone wants to live, in a condo box in the sky?
Yeah. So I'm thinking as a business, right? If you're running a business and if there is a huge roadblock that you have that's causing all of your employees or your customers and people that's dependent on you, it's making their life a living hell, you would be very quick in cutting off those regulations, hiring people. Like you say there is an immigration, there are too many immigrants, maybe use a lot of people that is in Canada to, hire them. How can you say I'm understaffed? So Brian, who do you think is winning in this game?
Pierre Poilievre, because people are looking around and saying this isn't working and I'm going to go vote for Pierre. And he's got some good solutions on that. But business-wise, who's winning? I don't know. Immigration consultants. So you were telling me about there are accounts that openly say, give me $30,000, I'll smuggle you to the U.S.
I'm going to display some of those in this video.
That's craziness. But, the bureaucracies in too many of our cities have caused the blockages. The province had a bunch of rules in place. Ford's been able to draw back some of them. Trudeau is bringing in some good ideas with his Housing Accelerator Fund, but he's doing it in such a way that it is taking too long to roll that program out. It's called an Accelerator Fund. I think they announced it was either budget, I think it was April 2022 they announced it. And, it was April 2021. And no money was flowing until the fall of 2023. Why? Because they built a bureaucracy.
Why is it that bureaucracy is stopping things? Is it because they're making money off it? Or do they love Canadians being in misery?
I think we've just added so many regulations over the years, and we don't stop and think, okay, do we still need this? And then we just add more regulations. I remember years ago, I'll give you one example. Someone convinced the McGuinty government that on all new home builds, you had to have insulation all the way down. So it used to be you'd go into a basement and, move into a new home. The basement would have insulation about halfway down. Why? Because below a certain point, you're past the freezing mark, and it didn't need to be there. But somebody said, "Oh, we'll have fewer heat loss if you force this," but it would add $6,000. The increase in the R value in the heat loss was so minimal, but it increased the cost of a house by $6,000. Well, there's one example of just, we're coming up with crazy ideas that somebody decides this has to be the way it is. And eventually you add all of those up, and suddenly a third of the cost of a home is government fees, taxes, regulations.
What is Pierre's plan in this? Do you think he'll be able to bring the $190,000 odd dollars down to like $10,000-$20,000?
Well, what he said is that he will reward municipalities that build fast and punish those that don't. That he will have his own fund, but if you don't build, you're not going to get the money. And I remember when he came out with that, the Liberals were very critical of it. Oh, how dare you punish municipalities? Well, guess what they're doing? They're adopting that idea to their own Housing Accelerator Fund. So, unfortunately, as I said, the Housing Accelerator Fund comes with some good ideas, but it also it's far too bureaucratic, and that's the problem with a lot of the Trudeau Liberal programs. They brought in a dental care program, for example, that a lot of the dentists have complained about because they said, well, there's already a provincial one where we look after low-income people. Just, add on to that. No. We need a new one, and we need a new set of paperwork, and we need a new form, and that adds time, and time is money. So, they're constantly coming up with ways to make life more complicated.
Yeah, I don't understand. So let's move on to the next topic I wanted to talk about, Ukraine war. So do we feel happy about Russia-Ukraine being in a war? Absolutely not. I'm sure all of us feel terrible about it. But what a lot of Canadians do not like is when they get to know the numbers of how much of their money is going into Ukraine, mostly as military equipment, through military contracting companies in Canada, they'll probably be unhappy because they're unable to. There are like more than 1 million people on in food bank. So, can you throw a little bit of light on what's going on with Canada's involvement in Ukraine war? Number one. And number two, every time this is brought up, liberals go, hey, because we are part of NATO. But Ukraine is not part of NATO, right?
No, Ukraine is not.
Not yet.
Ukraine should have been made part of NATO in 2008, 2009 era. And I've talked to Peter MacKay, who was at the meeting, and it was the Germans and the French who stepped in and said, no, they can't join. If Ukraine had joined NATO back then, Vladimir Putin was not as strong as he is now. He was not trying to put the band of the USSR back together. I firmly believe that we do need to support Ukraine. Could we be doing a better job of it? Absolutely. I was at an event the other night listening to Stephen Harper speak, and he said that we need to back both Ukraine and Israel because they are democracies, flawed, yes, but fellow democracies going up against authoritarian regimes. One of the frustrations I hear is that we're sending better equipment to the Ukrainian military than to our own. The Trudeau government has not done a good job equipping the Canadian military, and people look around and say, well, this doesn't seem right. And I get that. There are ways that we could be doing it. Legislation already exists that would allow us to just hand over to Vladimir Zelensky any frozen assets of Putin and his cronies that are in Canada. So that would include some hard cash, that would include some equities that could be sold, and just let Zelensky fight Putin with Putin's own money. We've already seized it. We seized it when he invaded, and we have not released it, and we're not going to. But there is a mechanism where you can flip this over. Now, Chrystia Freeland has been advocating for that, but she's also the finance minister. She could do it. I don't know what's holding her back. But allowing Putin to continue to move along, if we just said, Ukraine, you're on your own, Latvia would be next. Estonia would be next. And they are NATO allies. Of course, and so then we're fully drawn in. I think with Trump in power, a dialogue
needs to happen, right, Brian? Like, I don't, again, of course, I do not know if what Putin is saying is accurate or not, but he says that there has been zero dialogue from the Western countries. Negotiation table.
I don't think Biden has talked to him at all, but look, I think with Trump in power, you're going to see a resolution to this, and hopefully it won't include Ukraine giving up territory.
Yeah.
Will they get Crimea back? I don't know, but they crossed that line back in 2014, and few countries spoke up. Stephen Harper did at the time. He saw Putin at a G20. He said, I only have one thing to say to you, get out of Ukraine. And so Trump had a very good argument when he was in the campaign. They didn't invade when he was in power.
Of course, yeah.
And you'd say, well, that's because he's a crazy man, and who knows what he'll do. Okay, if that's why they didn't do it, I'm good with that.
He was a crazy man, but all the crazy stuff happened after he left.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
And if Harris had won, we'd all be wondering, is China going to invade Taiwan?
Yeah.
And I don't see that happening under Trump's administration.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And we'll see what happens with Rocket Man in North Korea.
So, a question. Do you, however, believe that it is justified for Canada to send so much money to Ukraine while they are unable to plan on how they could bring the inflation here down and help Canadian individuals like be able to pay for their food.
There's a lot of other areas where they could cut spending that isn't really helping anyone and still support Ukraine. Or there's other ways that they could allow military exports to Ukraine by making slight changes for Canadian manufacturers to be able to send the munitions, and that may not need to include government dollars. But this is a government that wastes everywhere. I heard Mitt Romney say a while ago in defense of the American spending that it's about 5% of their defense budget that they're spending. And he said to support Ukraine. But he said, if we don't support Ukraine and we just allow Russia to keep going, we'll be spending a lot more than that.
A lot more later on. Okay.
So I don't have an issue with what's happening there. I know there's going to be some people disagree with me, but I don't have an issue.
Makes sense. But I do agree with the fact that it's a spending government. No questions about that. My next question is with what's going on in Montreal. Again, I'm not posing this question as an expert. I'm posing this question as a spectator because like many Canadians, I've been looking at what's going on as well. Free Palestine, free Palestine. Now, how can we in Canada free Palestine?
By getting rid of Hamas.
Right.
Because who's oppressing the Palestinian people? Hamas, who took billions of dollars in aid and funneled it to their own bank accounts while they lived in Qatar like kings. Now they're living in Turkey with Erdogan. And we were sending over money, concrete, pipes for water supply systems. Improve your water supply. No, we're going to take them and we'll use the concrete for tunnels and we'll use the pipe to make rockets.
Yeah, but my question, it was posed in more of, we are not involved in the conflict, right?
No.
So why are we letting these protests happen where Canada has zero involvement? When you break down Canadian shops and offices, even if you want to support Palestine, how is it helping Palestine in any way? Have you ever thought about that?
Well, it's not. And I think it's turning a lot of people in Canada against their cause when you see cars burning and windows smashed. I know the Montreal police chief came out the other day and said, these riots had nothing to do with the pro-Palestinian movement. And my reaction was, no, they had everything to do with the pro-Hamas movement.
Exactly. That's a problem.
They were waving the flags. They were chanting their psalms. They were making the Hitler salute and talking about a final solution while doing all this. We've seen the video. It's all on X. You can't gaslight us anymore.
So why are we letting this happen?
Weak leadership at policing levels, backed up by weak leadership in mayor's offices. And it's the same thing here in Toronto. We've had since first one that I went to was October 9th, 2023. And sometimes multiple times a week, they would have these rallies, sometimes just once a week. And oftentimes the law's broken that other protests you'd see people charged or the police say, no,
burning
you're not doing that. But, we haven't allowed that to happen. There was a lot of backlash when there was the one rally in Vancouver.
Where the flags were burned.
And they said,
death to Canada,
death to Israel, death to the United States. That shocked a lot of people.
Of course.
And politicians immediately said, I guess we should ban the terrorist group that is doing this, Samadoun. Yeah. But police have been reluctant to charge anyone. And when you don't charge people for breaking the law, it emboldens them to break more of the laws. On top of that, Montreal, city I love, city I used to live in.
Beautiful city.
I worked there as a reporter. It's where I cut my teeth as a reporter. They have a lot of riots. There were certainly black bloc elements within the pro-Hamas protest. And they are anarchists, the black bloc. They have been involved in all kinds of violent protests that I've covered over the years. I sometimes joke in Montreal, they'll riot because it's Tuesday. But this one, I was talking with a friend who knows the history of riots in Montreal and the violence. And we just agreed, this feels different because of the message that went with it at the same time. The final solution is coming for you. Oh, okay, that sounds like you're advocating genocide.
Yeah, because most of their protest is from river to the sea. What is between river to the sea? It's all
Israel.
All of Israel. So yeah, Canadian flag was burnt. I believe the
I've
lady,
never seen a Canadian flag at any of the pro-Hamas protests.
yeah,
Not once.
because you're not allowed to. I mean, if you again, I never went to any of them, thankfully, but I've seen videos, of people putting on a spy camera and trying to enter that rally as in neutral or as an Israel supporter, and you're bullied out of the way.
Oh, yeah.
It's
I've shown up with my phone and taken video, and they open umbrellas in your face and try and
Wow.
stop you from being able to see anything.
Yeah. So that is not protest. That's not peaceful, right?
No.
One of the things that I see about the left is they're always, hey, be kind to people, and you should be nice. You cannot let people down.
And then it turns into be kind to people, you bastard, you
Yeah.
racist bastard.
Yeah. So you can
They want kindness, but not for you.
Yeah,
Not for
exactly.
me.
As long as you agree with them. So Trudeau did not do much when different flags were being burnt. For example, as an Indian immigrant, I would be upset when right out of Indian consulate, Indian flag is being burnt and you're not doing much about it. I would, of course, feel bad about it. Nothing was done regarding that, but you let that happen, and now people have moved on to burning Canadian flags. But if somebody is, let's say, burning an LGBTQ flag, right, they're put behind the bars right away.
Oh, the response would be swift. You see that people getting arrested for burning rubber on the rainbow crosswalks. Police take that very seriously. You can't deface that. But look, there's a long history of court decisions saying that burning a flag is a form of free speech. Apparently, burning rubber on a crosswalk is not. To me, they are the same act. But the courts have long said that, yes, you can burn a flag. Okay, but can you block the streets while burning something in effigy? Are you allowed to smash business windows or the convention center's windows? Is that free speech? No, it's not. And neither is advocating for the death of people when you're marching down Bloor Street, which I have seen. The police have had a hands-off approach to these protests in ways that I haven't seen for others. I've covered protests where the police have taken a standoff approach, hands-off approach for a while, and then they go in. This is more than a year. Normally it's, okay, we'll let them do what they're doing, we'll watch, and then we'll move. This is more than a year of doing nothing.
I don't know if you've taken a look at it. There is this gentleman who started, he's trying to kind of start an equivalent to America First in Canada.
Okay.
So he's starting something called as a Canada First movement. And he had a rally last weekend, and I guess over 100 people showed up. Considerably smaller rally than any of this pro-Hamas. So they were charged. They were being pushed around by the police. I do not know if they were charged, but one of them, I saw this Instagram reel of a security guard in Nathan Phillip Square asking the guy who was organizing Canada First movement to not hold the flag.
Okay, 45 minutes tops. That's okay. I'm not gonna stop you from holding a rally here. Just as long as you do a few things for me. One, as long as you take
have the police vans on.
Oh, okay. First of all, you'll have to take that down.
No, I don't. I was allowed to have it.
Who told you allowed to have that
have the
banner?
police vans on. Come and talk to me right now.
Okay, well, I'm telling you right now, having that banner up is a
That's
violation of
unfortunate.
Toronto bylaws.
This is a freedom of speech thing, and if other protesters in this country can raise flags, raise banners, but we can't, real Canadians, I'm sorry, boss, but you're not going to win this battle.
Okay, well, I'm
This
just
is
going
gonna
to
stay
having
here.
that flag up there is a violation of Nathan Phillips.
No, it's not. I just told you I can bring in the police liaison to talk to you and make sure that it's an A-OK thing for me to express myself and my movement here.
Okay. I understand.
That's it.
That's what I'm here to tell you right now.
Well,
bylaw doesn't
go
trump
about your day. We're
our
not
rights.
going to be hurting anybody. We're here with peace. This is Canada.
This is Toronto.
Yeah, it's not communist Toronto.
Okay, I understand.
This is Toronto. This is Canada. We are free to do what we want. I'm going to use my megaphone. If you like, you can talk to them right there. Go for it. Go for it.
Okay.
All right.
happy
So
to do
let's
that.
end this conversation. I'm staying. That's staying. We're staying. Good night.
Okay, that's all.
Walk of shame. Walk of shame.
So the security guard to me looks like a Canadian, right?
Yeah.
We've been thinking government, Trudeau. Do you think somewhere there is a bigger infrastructure or ideology, organization that is behind brainwashing, right? Like a Canadian citizen asking someone to not have Canadian flag up.
I think it's self-censorship and this view that we have to be ashamed of who we are. And so putting up the Canadian flag is offensive. I don't know how many times I go by Nathan Phillip Square and there's all kinds of people protesting with all kinds of flags. Buddy's not there telling them, you got to put your flag away. You know, I've seen the cops when there's a protest and a counter protest, the cops are like, okay, you take your flag over there, you take it over there, you guys stay apart. That's fine. But saying, no, you can't have a Canadian flag up in the public square of the city of Toronto at City Hall, that is ridiculous. But I think it is this, let's not offend people. You know, it's okay if they do it, but no, you can't do it because you got to hide the Canadian flag. And I haven't seen any evidence of anything beyond that. That's just how I've seen this come out over the years, is being ashamed of being Canadian, which is absolutely ridiculous. We've got people from around the world trying to come here because they think the place is great. They just like, oh, Canada's so bad. Canada's so racist. Canada's history we should be ashamed of. Canada's symbols we should be ashamed of. Everyone else should celebrate their culture.
Yeah.
And we should hide ours.
So that's one of the things that I see lacking in Canada, which is, as an immigrant who worked extremely hard, be able to work in this country and build a life in this country, I'm extremely grateful to what Canada has to offer. A lot of things that I wouldn't have been able to do back in India, I am able to do here. Even as a matter of fact, I do have that pride about Canada, but I see very less pride about being Canadian from a lot of local Canadians that I meet. Why do you think that is the case? Is it because lack of education?
It's because the education system tells you to be ashamed of your country,
Wow.
to be ashamed of your culture. I'm sure you saw the story about the Royal Canadian Navy looking to change their march song. It's a song called Heart of Oak. It goes back to the British Navy, and we inherited it. But we've got to get rid of it because it doesn't represent all genders. And there's some lines in it that the woman who wrote the report doesn't like. And I mentioned this to a friend who's in the Navy, who's Chinese background, son of immigrants. He said, joining the Navy gave me a sense of belonging in Canada, into Canadian traditions. And that song means so much to him because it made him part of something bigger in this country. But we have the left-wing ideology has decided you've got to tear down what's here already so that we can replace it with something else. And for too long, too many conservatives didn't want to seem racist. They didn't want to seem bigoted, so they didn't want to say anything. I don't care what you're going to call me if I say it's nuts that the Navy's going to change its song, or that it's nuts that you have to hide the Canadian flag. I'm not playing that game, and nobody else should anymore. We need to get out of this habit of saying that what we are and what we have built here is wrong and bad. Have there been problems? Of course. So you look at the whole problem, you look at the whole story, and you move on. You learn from history and you move on. A lot of these people are white liberal folks who have decided that, beat themselves up. And I've talked to them, and they will actually tell you that people who aren't white can't be racist. And I said, then you don't know many people who aren't white. Because you go around the world and you talk to someone, I'm sure we could go into where your family's from in India, and, well, who do they all hate? Oh, the guys over there.
Yeah.
Those guys. Oh, get them. Like,
Yeah.
that's...
We have names, Gore, like, my own friends used to call, kind of make fun of me because I have a darker complexion when you compare it to, India. And it was all fun.
And you talk to people from the Caribbean. If you're not from that island, well, then they've got all kinds of things to say. But there is this weird white liberal guilt that I've never understood that drives a lot of this. They think that...
And do they realize that they are not oppressing a minority in the world? White is the minority right now. Do you realize that? I mean,
it's about to be the minority in Toronto.
Yeah, and they're upset about them trying to oppress some sort of minority. So anything that is classified based on race and color of skin, for me, seems BS. Because you got to look at qualifications, characters. Like if you're trying to hire someone and you're asking me, okay, are you part of so? Are you, do you identify as so and so? And if you do, you're going to get a better preference to get a job. That just doesn't make sense to me.
So I ascribe to what Martin Luther King said. He said he wanted his kids to grow up in a world where you were judged by the content of your character,
Not by the color of your skin. Yeah.
Malcolm X believed that it should be all about race.
Mm-hmm.
Martin Luther King won the day back in the 60s. Malcolm X's argument has won the day now, and that's the dominant thing at the elite level within our society. That drives a lot of it. And a lot of this comes from the United States, but we import it. We import the craziness.
Yeah, because slavery did not happen as much as it did in US, right?
You can't say we didn't have any, but it was a short period of time.
Yeah.
And it was just a big announcement with a bunch of politicians who would not go to something that was named for a slave owner, but they were. You can look up this history. Joseph Brant, the Mohawk leader, who brought his people from upstate New York to southern Ontario after the American Revolution. They wanted to stay with the Brits. Joseph Brant had slaves who were black. He had slaves who were white. He had slaves who were from other indigenous groups. And he had them when he was in Canada. So slavery just used to exist everywhere in the world.
For generations.
And in some parts of the world, it still exists.
Yeah.
And we got rid of it a long time ago in this country, and we should be proud of that.
Should be proud of how far we've come.
Yeah. I think we used to have this, Canada was always good. We were the Underground Railroad. We always helped. We had no problems. You shouldn't do that either, but you shouldn't look at things through the lens of we're always evil.
Makes sense, yeah. Anyway, I know we are running out of time. My last issue right now that's happening. So I'm a conservative. I believe in the conservative ideas. However, I also see, I do not blame conservative people, but I know that policies that has been created lead them to think the way they think. So coming from India, I see huge amount of racism right now against it. And when I say racism, against Indian community.
Okay.
Right? When I say racism, what I mean is the hate towards Indian community. Now again, I'm not advocating to those who do not represent Canadian values. And I promise there are a lot of them. Probably do not really have that Canadian values yet. But it has happened because of mass immigration, right? Like the government let community colleges to open up. Community colleges were allowed to run businesses, and they ran businesses because they're business owners. They want to make money. People sold their land, whatever they had to. They came in here. Now they're trying to somehow stay back. What can we do to explain to conservatives that you got to shift the hate from this to the government so the policies can be reversed so this doesn't happen again?
I think if you talk to Pierre Poilievre, he's there already. You talk to people in the Conservative Party, that's where they're at. In the general population, I've seen some of the stuff. Like I'm sure you've seen the memes online or the complaints. It's not Tim Hortons, it's St. Hortons, things like that. If you don't manage the immigration system well, there's going to be a backlash.
It's going to be happening, yeah.
And it's unfortunate the way some of it's coming out, but it shouldn't be unexpected. I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying you screwed up so badly that people are now pissed off and they're looking around for someone to blame. And the fact that our current government also plays footsies with Khalistani separatist movements and starts fights with India, who should be our ally.
It's
does not help.
Ninth biggest trading partner.
India's ninth biggest trading partner?
I believe. I may be wrong. I'll take a look at it, but I think 9th or 10th biggest trading partner of Canada.
I first advocated for Canada to seek a free trade deal with India in 2005. The Paul Martin government had started looking for other places to do free trade deals. Harper looked at it. Not sure he was able to get there, but I just kept saying India's way better partner than China because of so many problems.
Because it's a democracy, and you know they're going to allow you to come and manufacture your goods.
But Trudeau has allowed the Khalistani separatist movement to fester, especially out in BC, less so in Brampton. It's there. And when people see others in Canada advocating for violence in another country, they don't like it. So, I think manage the immigration system properly. Stop allowing the Khalistanis. They've got more support in Canada than in India.
And that is what bothers me. I'm a Hindu, right? I had no clue what the heck Khalistan is. I had no clue. India is far more peaceful than it is portrayed if you would go out and live there. So I come here and I go to gurudwaras and amazing places. Like when I was a struggling international student, I have often taken help from gurudwara too, because they serve free food and they help the community out. And massive respect. And majority of Sikhs do not support Khalistan. So it is a radical movement that believes in trying to create a independent country in India while fighting in Canada.
And we've already had violence here in this country.
Yeah.
The Air India bombing, but also...
and that's the biggest terrorist attack that has ever happened against Canadian citizens.
Yeah, and until 9/11 was the biggest terrorist attack involving aircraft in the world. Justin Trudeau goes to India in 2018 and he takes Jaz Atwal with him, who had been convicted of attempted murder on an Indian politician on Vancouver Island. Why do you think the Indian government's not meeting with him? Him playing footsies with that, him allowing... he's also tried to use that to get votes here. I think that's all part of the backlash, and it's really unfortunate because the Sikh community in Canada, when I was growing up, the two main groups of Indians that I knew were not Hindu. It was either Sikhs or Catholics. I went to Catholic school, and there was a good-sized Indian population where I was growing up who were all Catholics out of the Goa area. But there was none of this back then. And it grew, it went away for a while, or at least it went underground. Trudeau seems to put it on steroids, and then it leads to where we are now. That and the temporary foreign worker program being so badly managed.
I can verify it's 9th biggest trading partner. So if I'm leader of a country, right, and I have a big diaspora, right, of Indian people in Canada, and I know that, certain groups are sensitive about a few things, and I know that right now China is not being a reliable partner for the West. West is dependent on China for most of the manufacturing. And if I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, okay, who can I trust? Who can replace China? And I'd get countries like India, Vietnam, Indonesia, but India would be in the top because they have population they're willing to support. And you want an ally like them who's not making an enemy out of anyone at this point of time, at least. But Trudeau goes and, in the middle of parliament, and he starts complaining about things before providing or without providing evidence. The last I checked, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of India, that's the last statement that has come out, and they told we still do not have anything. Not sure why, if there is something, why is it not publicized? Because it's become a tug of war between two countries in an ugly way on social media, on media, and why are you not providing any evidence? Like, I don't understand why is that happening.
There's a lot he does that I don't understand.
Okay. Great. Anyway, I know I cannot go to all the topics. Of course, I was very upset when the temples were attacked recently.
Yeah.
And I hope, government does something about taking care of everyone as they, say they want to.
Out in Brampton, I think Patrick Brown, the mayor there, he's got good connections with all the communities, and I think he acted quickly and did the right thing. But it's really unfortunate what's happened, but then hopefully things go back to normal.
Yeah, and it's not just attacks against temple, right? Attack against anyone. For example, that video, someone is holding a Canadian flag and he's being stopped versus, someone is burning Canadian flag and they're not hunted down quickly, right? Canada is a huge country with so much money. We have such a strong GDP, perhaps not the per capita GDP growth in the last few years because of Trudeau, but we've got resources. I recently heard Christia, she's so funny. She was talking about, we've got oil. I'm like, we don't have oil. We have it in the land, but you're not letting us dig them, right? So, yeah, there are a lot of things, hopefully we come up with a resolution, but thank you so much for taking some time out. I hope we could do this again, maybe a few more interesting topics. I'd love to get to know more about you individually, about your journalism career.
Sounds good. We'll talk again.
So this is for you.
Thank you.
So this is a Christmas bundle that I've been creating, guys. Best skincare that you can get out there. One of the best protein bars. It tastes like Sneakers. It has 25 grams of protein.
Excellent.
You know, zero sugar, vitamin water with no added preservatives. It's all fantastic. You're gonna experience them, but you can click the form below and just tell me what is your budget for Christmas gifting bundle. And if you're looking for cheap gifts, I know Trudeau has driven the cost up. So if you want to save, click. But this is for you.
Thank you very much.
I have the premium package for Brian because he's a premium guest. So you have some amazing perfumes that you can check out. It's all in there. I hope you enjoy it.
Well, thank you very much. We'll talk soon.
Thank you so much.